For decades, China has been characterized by rapid economic growth, global manufacturing capacity, and a strong central government. Recently, however, grumblings from different provinces and the growing discontent of the young population suggest that rebellion against the state is not a far-fetched scenario. Some see this as a sign of disintegration that could shake the Communist Party's powerful control mechanism. Others believe that we are talking about a state tradition that has managed to deal with various crises throughout history, and that such rumours are exaggerated. If you want to learn more about this topic, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and press the like button. Analysts who observed China from the outside for a long time realised that not everything was going smoothly. The vast geography, the many ethnic groups with different cultures and dialects, a growing urban-rural divide, and deepening economic inequalities all held the potential for great internal tension. The Chinese Communist Party has sought to solidify its authoritarian rule to keep different regions of the country under one roof, while maintaining popular support through economic development. However, as Xi Jinping enters the third term of his leadership, external factors such as increasing consolidation of power within the party, post-pandemic turmoil, global trade wars, and Euro-US sanctions are increasingly raising domestic grumblings. Now, some are asking aloud, is China disintegrating as provinces rise up against the Chinese Communist Party? The concept of provinces in China is not the same as federal systems in the West. Nevertheless, there are officially 23 provinces, 5 autonomous regions, 4 directly administered municipalities, and 2 special administrative regions. Although each is subordinate to the central government, they vary greatly in terms of their economic structures, geographical conditions, and cultural identities. For example, coastal provinces such as Guangdong and Jiangsu are considered to be the country's wealthy locomotives with their industry and exports. Inland regions such as Henan or Gansu struggle with relative poverty and backwardness. As the income gap between different regions grows, local leaders may complain that the centre is ignoring our problems. Likewise, provinces with huge metropolitan areas such as Chengdu and Chongqing are increasingly seeking to assert their interests at the administrative level. There are also ethnic mosaics and geographical challenges in places like Guangxi, Guizhou, and Yunnan. Autonomous regions such as Xinjiang, Tibet, and Inner Mongolia are already fragile. In special administrative regions such as Hong Kong and Macau, there are different levels of sensitivity. This picture may raise the question of whether China will remain in one piece. The CCP, of course, does not tolerate any demand for regional separation or autonomy. Nevertheless, China's complex structure could trigger a major split. To better understand this possibility, we need to look at the history of the CCP and the situation in China before 1930. Throughout its history, China has gone through countless struggles to keep its vast geography and many different ethnic and cultural communities under one flag. Many people think that modern China was unified thanks to the People's Republic established in 1949 under the leadership of Mao Zedong, but the roots of this centralization go much deeper. In fact, even before World War I, the Chinese territory was very loose and fragmented during the late Qing dynasty. Although the dynasty annexed large areas such as Tibet and Xinjiang from the 17th century onwards, the central government's influence in these areas was often limited, and a complex balancing act was maintained with local autonomous powers. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, invasions and concession agreements initiated by European powers, the Russian Tsardom and Japan, further weakened China's control over these regions. With the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1912, the country experienced a long period of chaotic warlordism. During this period, places like Tibet and East Turkestan became autonomous areas that existed almost on their own. Inner Mongolia had a similarly complex status. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, the nationalist government attempted to partially control these areas, but de facto rule by regional commanders or local leaders prevailed. At the same time, developments such as British diplomatic influence over Tibet, Soviet relations with local rulers in Xinjiang, and the Japanese takeover of Manchuria painted a picture of China's territorial integrity in tatters. In this internally turbulent geography, the Chinese Communist Party gained a mass base with its rural revolution strategy in the 1930s and 1940s. Although nationalists and communists appeared to be on a common front against the Japanese invasion during World War II, a nationalist-communist civil war broke out as soon as the war ended. In 1949, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, the victorious CCP declared a new China. But not all of the country's territory was smoothly unified overnight. In the East Turkestan region, for example, there were organizations such as the short-lived East Turkestan Republic, partly supported by the Soviets. The CCP eliminated these local governments through military and diplomatic moves. Similarly, in Tibet, it intervened militarily against the Tibetan government in the 1950s and formally incorporated it into the People's Republic. Although it is said that local autonomy was granted through various agreements known as the White Card, in practice, Tibet was largely subordinated to Beijing. Tibetans repeatedly attempted to revolt against this occupation and the cultural transformation that followed. The major uprising in 1959 was suppressed. The Dalai Lama was forced to seek refuge in India, and the Tibetan issue remains an unresolved dispute to this day. Xinjiang was no different. As a steppe desert geography sharing a border with the Soviet Union, the Uyghur majority region has historically been considered one of China's fringe regions. Central control was often weak even under the dynasties. The Communists established a strict garrison system here after 1949. In 1955, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region was officially proclaimed, but many repressive policies were implemented in order to conform the religious and ethnic identity of the local population to Beijing's ideological framework. Occasional outbreaks of violent clashes, bombings or mass demonstrations gave voice to the Uyghur element's desire to secede from China. The facilities established in Xinjiang after the 2010s, described as concentration camps by the Western press and re-education centres, in Beijing's words, drew international outrage. Beijing tries to justify its repressive policies by presenting Xinjiang as a region where terrorism and radical movements are fought. From the outside, however, it is clear that the region's hostile masses against the CCP regime have not been completely silenced, and tensions persist. Hong Kong has a different history. Handed over to the British in 1842, the port city and the surrounding areas developed as a British colony throughout the 20th century. In 1997, it was handed over to China on the principle of one country, two systems, but Hong Kong residents were promised a high degree of autonomy for 50 years. Nevertheless, in the last decade, Beijing's tightening of control over Hong Kong has led to massive protests. The Umbrella Movement in 2014 and wider demonstrations in 2019 saw millions of people take to the streets. Xi Jinping's administration suppressed these demonstrations, imposed the national security law, and effectively stripped Hong Kong of its autonomy. For many Hong Kongers, this has increased their antagonism towards Beijing. On the one hand, the demand for Western-style civil liberties in Hong Kong, which is seen as a global financial centre, continues, while on the other, the Communist Party is trying to tie it completely to its political line. Thousands of activists have been arrested or forced to flee abroad. As a result, Hong Kong has become a city-state-like region, with occasional outbreaks of mass movements reluctant to subscribe to the CCP's ideal of a one-piece China. The effort to hold together such diverse and vast areas across China has its roots in the legacy of the Qing dynasty's territorial expansion. Qing rulers incorporated Tibet, Xinjiang, and Inner Mongolia into the empire, partly militarily and partly diplomatically. During the founding of the Republic and the turbulent period that followed, these tended to partially break away. After 1949, however, the Communist Party strengthened its control of these regions under the rhetoric of national unity and territorial integrity. Under the name of regional self-government, autonomous regions were established for ethnic communities such as Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongols, Zhuangs, etc. However, Beijing has never implemented these statuses as full autonomy. Local parliaments or governing bodies have generally been subordinated to senior cadres appointed by the CCP. From the outside, it is sometimes puzzling how this vast geography is truly under one roof. In addition to tight political control, Beijing is trying to integrate the local population through economic development projects. For example, cotton production and the exploitation of energy resources in Xinjiang, tourism and infrastructure investments in Tibet are all aimed at increasing the population's dependence on Beijing. But these policies also bring accusations of cultural assimilation. Historical animosities have accumulated and grown. In the case of Tibet, the Dalai Lama and his followers are still in exile, and local culture and religion are repressed. In Xinjiang, the Uyghur population is subjected to forced labour, the destruction of mosques, and the breakup of families. Hong Kongers are also speaking out to Western public opinion, saying, "China is swallowing us up, destroying our freedoms." The CCP regime, on the other hand, sees them as separatist elements provoked by the West, and considers them a threat to national sovereignty. On the one hand, it claims that it is developing these regions by sharing prosperity, building railroads, highways, and huge investments. On the other hand, it maintains control with its military and police forces. This contradictory picture is fueling the debate on whether China will break up. Many are asking, if China's economy slows down and central authority weakens, could places like Tibet, Xinjiang, or Hong Kong try to make their own way? In theory, each of these regions is different enough to claim independence on the basis of their cultural or historical identity. The Uyghurs have a historical longing for an East Turkestan state. The Tibetans have never given up on the idea of genuine autonomy or independence under the leadership of the Dalai Lama. And in Hong Kong, the yearning for a self-governing city-state could be strengthened if the one country, two systems model goes into full collapse. On the other hand, the CCP's central authority is still very strong. The loyalty of the military and security services is largely under Xi Jinping. Economic relations make these regions dependent on Beijing. And internationally, not many countries dare to speak out and support the breakdown of China's unity. Beijing can react very harshly, claiming interference in internal affairs. For example, it can put trade and diplomatic pressure on Western states that speak out on Xinjiang or Hong Kong. It is therefore not an easy scenario for these regions to secede with external support. Still, small-scale uprisings or protests are far from over. If the economic crisis or political turmoil in China deepens, demands for autonomy or independence in these regions could reignite, experts say. Hong Kong has already been rocked by mass protests in 2019, while a quiet resistance continues in Tibet. Xinjiang is constantly on the line of high tension. There are also occasional identity protests in Inner Mongolia. Taiwan is also an overseas dispute, but it continues to be de facto independent. The CCP sees Taiwan as a breakaway province, but the situation there is more complicated because Taiwan considers itself an independent state. The Chinese Communist Party claims that economic development and nationalist pride are the glue that binds these regions of very different origins and vast area together. Rapid growth over the last 40 years has allowed the Han population in particular to migrate from the central regions to these outlying provinces, reshaping the demographic structure. While the proportion of the Uyghur population in Xinjiang has declined, the settlement of Han Chinese in Tibet has increased. This massive wave of migration gives the CCP the advantage of both cultural and political control, but it also raises local resentment. Likewise, Hong Kong continues to see massive migration from the mainland. Beijing is encouraging it under the slogan of co-development, but antagonisms in these regions have fueled complaints that the centre is committing cultural genocide, destroying our identity. Today, Xinjiang is the most critical of these conflict areas and the most prominent in the international media. This is because the Uyghur issue has been raised as far as the genocide debate, and the US and some Western countries have imposed sanctions. Beijing denies these allegations, but images of camps in the region, witness testimonies and leaked documents and information tell a different story. Hong Kong has similarly faced backlash from the West, with a national security law enacted in 2020 sharply curtailing the city's freedoms. Many Hong Kong activists have fled abroad. Tibet, on the other hand, has taken a back seat on the world agenda, but the issue of the Dalai Lama remains sensitive. Beijing considers the Dalai Lama a separatist and tries to block his international tours. On the other hand, thousands of Tibetans say they are enduring repression to preserve their religious identity. Taken together, the CCP's holding together is in fact a constant management of tensions. Despite this, the answer to the question, is China in danger of disintegration from within the CCP or from the outside, is very unlikely at the moment. This is because it has an authoritarian apparatus. Its economic power is still enormous. Its military and security apparatus are largely loyal to the party, and it has trade partners in the international order. Many countries around the world have established deep economic ties with China, and the impact on the global economy of the risk of its disintegration is a cause for concern. Nevertheless, Beijing has not completely ruled out the potential for insurgency in these fringe regions. Moreover, the word insurgency can encompass not only outright secessionism, but a wide range of protests, from demands for economic rights to ecological protests, from marches of unemployed youth to labour unrest. There have been numerous reports of rising dissatisfaction in recent years, especially among the youth. Official figures put the youth unemployment rate at over 20%, while independent observers suggest that it may actually be much higher. Some estimates put the number of 15 to 24-year-olds at around 300 million, a significant number of whom have no access to permanent employment. This means that millions of young people are beginning to ask, where is the future the CCP offers us? The party leadership, which has long boasted of an economic miracle and used the rhetoric of rising China, is coping with such a wave of unemployment which can create deep discontent that can undermine its authority. Young people may shift from passive forms of protest such as Tangping and Bailan to more radical methods, and certain groups on social media may spread harsh messages against the Xi Jinping administration. These criticisms are circulating on the peripheries of the internet, even as the party restricts them through censorship and security measures. If provincial governments find themselves unable to cope with their own budget deficits as the economy slows, there could be a veiled disobedience to the central government. For example, if some regions start to say, we keep sending all these taxes to Beijing, but we don't get enough infrastructure investment in return, there could be a rift between local parties and the centre. Examples of this have been felt in recent history, if not overtly, at least partially. For example, during the pandemic, there was friction with the centre when places like Guangdong or Shanghai tried to impose their own quarantine policies. During the mass quarantine crisis in Shanghai, the protests of the local population and the demand of the local authorities to adopt a more flexible policy were met with Beijing's strict instructions. Xi Jinping's line prevailed, but there was much talk that tensions were growing between different cliques within the party. For years, the CCP has highlighted Xinjiang and Tibet as the most prominent examples of regional separatism. Now, however, not only ethnic riots, but also the possibility of an economically motivated provincial uprising are being taken seriously. Events such as the banking scandal in Henan or labour unrest in coal mines in the northern provinces can set the stage for fight for bread protests. Sometimes these demonstrations are quelled by harsh police crackdowns, but the fire is always smouldering. Some online sources report that there are stirrings of demands for federation in the south of the country. It is impossible to confirm this at the official level, as the party equates such demands with treason. But if you look at foreign media outlets that like to headline, China is falling apart, the interprovincial strife economic stagnation, and ideological tensions suggest that the cement holding the country together is starting to loosen. Another important factor is China's foreign policy pressure and the need to cope with sanctions. A trade war with the US, high-tech embargoes and restrictions on the European market mean that when exports suffer, production centres may be forced to slow down. Coastal provinces like Guangdong depend on export earnings, and a slowdown in the economy there means more unemployment and less revenue for municipalities. Provincial governments are then forced to either borrow or raise taxes, both of which provoke public outcry. At some point, the view that the policies imposed by the centre are not working for us may take root. A huge country like China already has a long history of dynastic collapse, rebellions, and civil wars under its rule. Today, of course, the Communist Party has the surveillance technologies, cyber control, and security apparatus of the modern era at its disposal, and it continues to use it to protect the country's integrity. However, Xi Jinping's authoritarianism has also caused discontent among some groups within the party. The public also feels that economic prosperity is slowing down on the one hand, while repression is increasing on the other. Moreover, as the income gap widens between red capitalists and party elites and ordinary citizens, grumblings are growing louder. As respect or fear of the central government loosens in the various provinces, could this grumbling take the form of open rebellion? Historically speaking, major peasant and sectarian uprisings such as the Taiping and Nian rebellions played a role in the fall of the Qing dynasty. The Chinese Civil War was also a huge divisive struggle between nationalists and communists. Today, it is perhaps not easy to envision large-scale armed uprisings, but revolts can manifest themselves not through gangs and peasant armies as in the past, but through cyber activism, urban protests, work stoppages, and mass marches. The party state could make extensive use of its security apparatus to suppress such mobilizations, but at an increased international backlash and economic cost. There have been spontaneous protests in cities against the recent implementation of zero COVID. Although these were limited to a few thousand people, the party leadership panicked and reacted harshly. The information provided by the institutions suggests that the country's internal stability is actually not very robust. According to some observers, the conditions for a revolutionary disintegration in China have not yet been created. This is because party control is still strong, military and economic resources are concentrated at the centre, and local governments maintain their legitimacy within the party framework. In addition, many citizens have been fed the propaganda that foreign powers might want China to break up, and the view that unity is a must regardless of internal problems predominates. Nevertheless, if the wheels of the economy slow down severely, unemployment rises to 20 to 25%, trade tensions escalate, or internal party power struggles erupt, it is possible that provinces could act on their own or encourage mass protests. In the end, the question remains whether the riots in China headlines are just sensationalism or a real possibility. A provincial uprising against Xi Jinping on its own still seems unlikely, but not impossible if the country faces a multi-layered crisis. Over the next decade, if China's economy falls into a severe recession, foreign trade routes are blocked, and large swathes of the population experience a dramatic decline in living standards, the party's legitimacy could crumble. There are countless examples in the course of history of how even seemingly gigantic empires can quickly crumble. In an authoritarian state like China's, there may be calm on the surface, but there is a risk that the simmering tensions underneath could suddenly bubble to the surface. Foreign countries may either desire or fear this scenario, depending on their own strategies. China's disintegration or civil war could also devastate the global economy. Third parties may calculate on which side our interests lie, but the scale of such chaos would be far-reaching. For this reason, no one is officially calling for China to break up, but it is widely believed that internal weaknesses are growing. In response to these concerns, the Chinese state is strengthening the rhetoric of unity and solidarity, fomenting nationalism, and calling the people to arms with the propaganda that the West is hostile to us and wants to tear us all apart. Whether this will backfire or push the masses to tighten their ranks around the Xi Jinping administration remains to be seen. Many young people are saying, "We are tired of hearing about external enemies. We want jobs and freedom at home." Party cadres in the provinces also complain, "If we wait for instructions from the centre on everything, the provinces have no initiative and local problems grow." There has been no violent provincial revolt yet, but this discontent may be simmering behind closed doors. After all, as we can see from the pages of history, rebellions in China have always erupted after long periods of preparation. If the conditions are ripe, a spark can ignite a flame. But right now, the Communist Party is trying to minimize the risk by tightly controlling the internet, civil society, and the bureaucracy. How sustainable this is will be tested by the survival of the economy and society. The course of history is full of turning points that no one can predict. We will be watching closely. What do you think? Could these developments really tear China apart in the long run? Or can the party state manage this crisis as well? You can join the debate by sharing your comments. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and leave a like for this post. In the next podcast, we will continue to bring you fascinating geopolitical and economic developments in other parts of the world.